Hey, thanks for checking out another project video. My name is Mitch and this is Made by Mitch, where I show you the things I make and what I learned making them. Today I'm going to show you how I made these really simple bookshelves. Let's check it out. So recently my kids have really gotten into reading books, and instead of the books being all over the house and all over their floor like they normally are, I decided to build this display shelf so that way they can see what they wanted to read and keep it a little more organized in their play area. This was a really simple project and it only took a few hours, so let me show you how I did it. So the first thing I did was cut everything on the miter saw. Now you can just as easily use a circular saw for this, but I have a miter saw so I thought I might as well use it. And I set up a stop block here on my stand so that way these repeatable cuts I can just go through them really fast. This shelf only consists of a few different pieces. It was just the bottom, the back, the sides, and this dowel that goes across the front. Alright, wanted to share this quick tip with you that helped me out and saved me a lot of time. I just got everything cut to size, and what I did was I put blue painter's tape to fasten it together temporarily, and then I took it up to the house just to see if it would fit and it was the right size with what I wanted. And it turns out that it doesn't really work for what I want, so I'm going to use 1x4s instead of 1x3s. I wanted to tell you this because it might be a good idea to fasten everything temporarily with tape and test it out if you're unsure of how large you need this shelves to be. Otherwise I would have sanded everything down, fastened everything together, then realized that the shelves were too small. So fasten it together temporarily and then it'll save you some time in the long run. After I realized I used the wrong size, then I went back to the store, got some 1x4s, and then I did the same thing. I cut all of these to size. The next thing I had to do was cut a place for the dowel to fit as the front part of the shelf. And to do this, I put the two pieces together and then I drilled a hole in the middle of them. And doing this, I make sure I put a piece underneath the way I could drill down into, and I clamped everything down as tight as I could without damaging the wood. And then I marked the place where I would drill, and then I used a 3/4 inch Forstner bit and drilled a hole between these two pieces. It's important that you clamp them together, otherwise your boards will split apart when you start to drill them. I wasn't sure how this would work out, but it actually worked out much better than I thought it would. So I just repeated this for the other two shelves. And while I'm doing this, I wanted to give a big shout out to all my patrons over on Patreon, especially my two top supporters. Thank you guys so much. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page or supporting me on Patreon, I'll leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much. Next, I sanded everything up to 220 grit. I used the random orbit sander, but I lost the footage of that. And then I used this dowel with sandpaper around it to get the tight spots where the dowels would go. And then the next thing I had to do was just assemble the shelves together. I used this corner clamp to hold things in place while I drilled them, and this was a huge help. And then I used a countersink bit and pre-drilled these holes, and then I added 1.5 inch screws. Now these 1.5 inch screws were probably overkill, but it worked out okay for what I was using it for. After doing one side, I just flipped it over and attached the other side, and then I attached the back, also pre-drilling and using the countersink bit to countersink these screws. You definitely don't have to use screws for this if you don't want. I did just because of the way that I wanted it to look, but you could use brad nails or finishing nails or something like that if you prefer for this type of thing. After the shelf part was put together, then it was time to add the dowel. And so what I did was I put a clamp and just clamped this to my workbench. That way it wouldn't spin when I tried to drill and pre-drill these holes. And I did the same thing, used the countersink bit, pre-drilled, and then I used the 1.5 inch screws. I use spray shellac to finish these just because it dries really fast and it's great for these types of smaller projects. And so I just put 2 coats of this spray shellac on there, letting it dry for about 10 to 15 minutes in between. Then I can hang the shelves. The first thing I had to do was mark where my studs were using a stud finder. And after I found where my studs were, I found the center point of the wall, and then I would line that up with the center of the shelf. And so first I found the center of the wall, and then I marked where the center of the shelf would be, and then I adjusted kind of the height, how far apart I wanted them to be, and this is all relative to your situation, your wall, and how you're going to hang them. Then I had to line up where the studs were based on where the shelf would be placed on the wall. So once I measured out where I would be putting the screws into the shelf, I held the shelf in place, and then I pre-drilled through the shelf into the wall so I knew exactly where they needed to be. And one of my holes actually was not in a stud, so I used these drywall anchors that I picked up at my local hardware store. I definitely recommend these. I've got a link in the description for them. I use these all the time, and they hold like up to 75 pounds. So if you can't find a stud, these are a great alternative. They screw right into the wall. So my holes were already drilled and marked, so all I had to do was just drill the shelf into the wall. I did have to remove the dowel off the front just to be able to put this up, so I had to fasten that back on, and then we were in business. So after getting the first one hung, I could go ahead and hang the other two shelves. This was a really fun and simple project, and it didn't take that long to do at all. And the kids love it. They can see all their books, they can reach them for the most part, and this just really lifts the whole space in the area that they play. And so I totally recommend you trying this project out if you like the way that it looks.
If you like this video, you may like some of the other projects I have on my channel. I'll link those right here. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next project.